Scorestreaks are meant to be awe-inspiring in any Call of Duty game, in particular the higher tiered ones. Going on a 17 kill streak to get the highest streak in the game, for instance, should be rewarded in kind. So imagine my surprise when I played the Black Ops 4 beta and was underwhelmed by each and every streak available. Calling in the Strafe Run, for example, resulted in 0 kills and nothing more than a light and sound show for my enemies. But I'm not just going to complain about the streaks, however, I'm going to offer solid advice to buff and modify the streaks to make them great once again. Now before I get into the detailed Scorestreak suggestions, I wanted to mention two things that are obviously hindering all the Scorestreaks in the game. First, the maps themselves. Every map in the beta was an extremely indoor map. I guess this is obviously an unlikely change at this stage in the game, but hopefully it improves with the rest of the maps. For example, the Contraband map was the only map that was considered an outdoor map. The Frequency map, on the other hand, was half indoors. The Seaside map had buildings everywhere, with the most popular locations being indoors. The Gridlock map did have some outdoor lanes, but even then it had tons of overpasses covering half those areas. And the Payload map, on the other hand, was 80% buildings. Now typically, there's always been plenty of open ceilings in these Call of Duty indoor areas, but it seemed like there was less of that in Black Ops 4. Now the second issue is with the perks Cold-Blooded and Ghost. I would hope that both of these are unlocked at later levels, so people have to actually go out of their way to choose it instead of them being a quote, "this is the best I have" perk. It seemed like most of the time you called in a streak, for example, you were met with a full gray map, which is beyond frustrating. If you were lucky, you may get one red box, but other than that, everyone was hidden. Perhaps they could even split Cold-Blooded into two categories like it's always been, with Blind Eye being the new one. That, or they could put Cold-Blooded in a more perk-oriented category. Right now, it's the absolute best perk in Tier 1. Swapping it to a tier with a more heavily used perk would do wonders. So hopefully the data acquired from the beta test can indicate what perks are being used most frequently. If it can, I'd put Cold-Blooded in a category that would make the player have to actually choose to use it, rather than it being more or less a freebie. So now let's talk about each Scorestreak individually and how it fared in the beta. First up is the Rcxd. Now surprisingly, this was the most efficient killer out of a majority of the Scorestreaks. However, if it fell on its back, it was game over. You may as well have just exited the streak at that point. If this thing flips over, there's nothing you can do to flip it back over unless a teammate runs into it a few times. I couldn't tell if this was just a bug or if it was truly intended to work like a turtle. So there needs to be a flip command, as it happens a lot with how fast this car is. And I've also seen a lot of people say that the controls were too hard to maneuver, or that it was running on Crackhead Pro speed. I did have a lot of issues of it going too fast, but I kinda liked it like that. Next up is the normal UAV. So I timed this streak after assuming it had its duration cut in half, and I was surprised to see it only being up for 20 seconds. If anything, this needs a duration buff and a quicker scan time for the current amount of points it costs. Also, why on some maps is it the size of a bomber aircraft? But even with that being the case, on some maps the sky is so bright you can't see anything, let alone a UAV. And that's even with the engineer perk. I'm hoping this is just a glitch, but it literally looks like Krillin came and let off a solar flare. The next streak is my favorite one in every Call of Duty game, the care package. And this needs fixed. The current care package deployment mechanics are thoroughly frustrating. In older games, you could throw the care package marker wherever you wanted, and then deal with the consequences should it land on a roof. In this game, you both have to pick a valid spot to place it, and then throw down the marker. To make matters worse, if you mess it up and try to call it in on a spot where it's not allowed, it puts the marker entirely away instead of you being able to spam click until you got a good spot. Seriously, it sometimes would take upwards of 20 to 30 seconds, no exaggeration, of me running around trying to find a legit spot to call in the care package. The fact that this streak, the Mantis, and the Strike team all use this mechanic is crazy. Just let me call in the care package anywhere I want. Or, as we saw in Advanced Warfare for instance, make it have some kind of hover mechanics and actually come to me. As it stands now, a majority of the ground on any given map will simply not let you place your marker down. Next, we have the counter UAV, and this suffers from the same shortened duration as the UAV. Every other Call of Duty game seems to have a constant 30-second duration, but this one also stopped at 20 seconds. I feel like this should also take 2 rockets to destroy and not just one. With the changes to the minimap in Black Ops 4, including the new Fog of War mechanic, the counter UAV is a powerful score streak, if not one of the best in the game. So I hate the fact that it can be destroyed so easily currently. Next, we have the Hellstorm Missile. This was one of the few streaks I found to be worth the cost. But with the cold-blooded spam, however, you have to guess 9 out of 10 times as to where the enemies actually are. Some call-ins resulted in nothing but gray, which is a waste. We can chalk this up again to the cold-blooded spam. Overall though, this streak did feel good when you could actually see a few red boxes. Next up is the lightning strike. Now this streak 100% needs a UAV scan on the initial opening. With that new fog of war mechanic, you can't see diddly squat when you attempt to call it in. Black Ops 3, for example, pinged the entire map on your initial opening, so you at least had a slight heads up. I would also recommend an increase in damage and a faster deployment time. It wouldn't hurt to somehow make the buildings a different color on the lightning strike screen, just so you'll know if you're about to place it on a roof or a building. I'm not sure how hard that would be to implement, however. The next streak is the Mantis, and this, by far, was one of my favorite streaks in the game. However, it's still a shell of its former Cerberus self. Seriously, this thing moved at a snail's pace, which in a fast-paced game such as Black Ops 4 spells disaster. It needs a health buff immensely as it currently can be destroyed effortlessly. The L2 lock-on mechanic also does absolutely nothing. I don't know if this is glitched or what, but there's no lock-on ability at all, despite the in-game screen saying as such. Now the AI, when you're not controlling this, needs to be smartened up as well. The Mantis is definitely worse than the Cerberus in all regards. In Black Ops 3, I could let my Cerberus run free and it would actually get kills. As it stands now, the Mantis won't do anything well on its own. And also, why was the machine gun aspect of this removed? Basically, it needs a smarter AI, an increase in mobility, the lock-on mechanic fixed, and perhaps an alternative firing mode. Now the Sentry Gun is the next streak, and I was so excited for this one, but it fell flat on its face. The Sentry Gun, which is something you want to have a placement outline for, doesn't have one. Without this placement outline, you're left guessing to where it's deployable at. And spoiler alert, it's almost not deployable at all. You'll get caught with your pants down 9 out of 10 times when you try to put this down, only to have it fail and put the entire streak away. Then you have to push triangle again, pull the briefcase out, and try to place it elsewhere. It just takes so long to deploy, and most of the time it doesn't deploy at all. And then there's the fact that you can't move it once you deploy it, which is also frustrating for how weak it is. It needs a huge buff to its alertness and locate to fire time. I've never received more than 2 kills with a deployed Sentry Gun. Of course, I have a feeling this stems from the cold-blooded / ghost spam as well. It's also supposed to rotate 360 degrees, but I never saw it do that either. It seemed to turn incredibly slow, which may be why I've never seen it successfully rotate all the way around. I also wouldn't be opposed to a rippable turret effect either, like in Advanced Warfare. Let us have the option to rip that sucker off and use it like a death machine. Next is the Attack Chopper. Now this one was actually mentioned in the Treyarch beta patch notes as having a buff incoming, and this shouldn't be of surprise as it's currently wank on the cob. They specifically said that they'd be making it more aggressive. That's all fine and dandy, but again, if everyone is running the counter to it by default, it doesn't matter how aggressive they make it if it can't see anyone to target. Next, we have the Strike Team. Now this is one of the better streaks in the game for sure, but it could use a buff as well. If this is the dogs or rap streak equivalent in this game, it needs to be powered up accordingly. First of all, as mentioned before, you have to deploy a drop marker which suffers the same bonker mechanics as the care package. You'll spend more time finding an appropriate call-in spot than should be necessary. Once they are deployed, it's really hit or miss as to how they perform. Some games I had them actively engage enemies, and other games they would just sit idle and twiddle their thumbs. And that's even if I sent them on a command or rallied them to my current position. And this is another aspect people have to manually control. You can either send them to a strike location or set them to rally on your current spot. The drawback to the strike part is that you can only select a spot in your current vicinity, which isn't very far. You'll be constantly having them to strike and rally just to get them to keep up. So I for one don't think this streak should have a deployment marker at all. I think it should be just like the Raps were in Black Ops 3. Earn it, call it in, and be done with it. I think their AI needs a medium to large buff in their decision-making capabilities as well. I couldn't tell if they needed a health buff just yet, but I think they could go for a duration benefit for sure. They should also benefit from Crash's ammo packs and health buff if they don't do so already. And if it's possible, there should be more than 2 of these guys. This score streak should be fearful, and 2 simple AI-controlled teammates isn't that awe-inspiring. 3 at the bare minimum would be better. There's no 2 in team. Next up is the absolute worst streak in the game, the Strafe Run. There's gotta be something wrong with this score streak. I have ample clips where an enemy called one of these in and I just stood still for the entire duration of the streak and wasn't touched at all. It currently does a whopping 6 strafing runs, which is quite a lot, but I have yet to receive more than 1 kill with it, ever. And I've called in several of these and only received that one single kill. So I don't know what the issue is, whether it's the enclosed maps or the cold-blooded or ghost spam, but something has to give here. For the second most powerful streak in the game, this thing should light up anyone that's even remotely outside. Expand the blast radius 1,000-fold if need be, but something needs changed. The Rcxd is a better score streak than this one is currently. Not to mention that it also sounds like a whistling tea kettle, which is surprisingly comical. I think they should use the Black Ops 2 Warthog sound effect instead. Now lastly, we have the gunship. Finally, a devastating score streak. This one is great, save for the fact that you can't actually see anyone due to cold-blooded. So it's more or less a guessing game as to where the enemies will be due to this. The good news is, it does have 3 different firing modes which you can switch between using triangle quite easily for rapid destruction. However, for such a high score streak, I think it should counter cold-blooded for just a few seconds out of its duration. Everyone should pay the price for at least 5 to 10 seconds before cold-blooded kicks in. This will make it fearsome for at least the start of its duration, but not so extremely powerful that it forces a lobby of newbie boobies to rage quit. And that, as they say, is that. These are my proposed score streak changes. I realize that these aren't all the score streaks in the game, as there's bound to be more included in the final build. And I also know that a lot of you probably want the cost of most of these decreased as well. I wouldn't mind this either, but I'm sure the developers will just direct your attention to the ComSec gear piece, which reduces the cost of all streaks already. Still, even with this piece of gear, I'd much prefer to see all the streaks reduced 75 to 100 points from their current values. I realize that with the new changes to assist points in this game, in that they give you a full kill instead of just a few measly points, score streaks theoretically should be easier to come by, but this simply isn't the case. Couple the outrageous point values to the cold-blooded and ghost spam, and you've got the worst score streaks in any game ever, period. Even giving the World War II streaks a run for their money. I'd run the Fighter Pilot, Glide Bomb, and Paratroopers over any 3 of the Black Ops 4 beta streaks any day of the week. So let me know in the comments what you thought of the score streaks, as well as if you approve of my proposed changes. If you have any additional changes that I didn't mention, feel free to post them in the comments as well, and I'll pass them on to the developers. One thing's for certain here, these score streaks as they stand are anything but devastating.